Good evening, and thank you for joining us here in San Francisco at Shasta Ventures. My name is Stephen Nellis. I'm a reporter with Reuters, the Newswire, where I cover technology here in San Francisco. And we've got with us tonight Tien Tzuo of Zuora. He's the CEO and founder. And then we also have Jason Pressman, who is a partner here at Shasta Ventures. And what we're going to talk about tonight is how to go to market with a subscription software company and the process that Zuora has been in for the past decade or more of building a company from an idea that Tien had after he was out of Salesforce and had gone through the IPO there into a company now that's got hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue and is on track to have $1 billion revenue in some point in the future. We won't say exactly when because that would put us in trouble with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. But joining us tonight, we have a live audience here in the Shasta Ventures space in San Francisco. We also are going to be joined by folks on Facebook Live. And what we're going to be doing is discussing a bit with these two. But then we'll also have an opportunity to do questions. We'd like to get both some questions from the audience here live and then you folks out there who are following along with us on Facebook Live. And if you tune in partway through, no worries. This will also be up afterward for reviewing and looking at again on the Shasta Ventures Facebook page. So without further ado, though, what I'd like to do is kind of give these two gentlemen some time to introduce themselves and tell you what they're about. So Tien, I think we should start with you. You're the man of the evening here. So tell us about Zuora and a little bit about how you got the idea of a subscription economy, which has taken over the world now, right? The biggest companies in the world, like Apple, are shifting their businesses to subscription services like music. Car companies are talking about how to make money off subscriptions to services in the car. But 10 years ago, you were just a guy who had come out of a very successful company called Salesforce and had this idea for a billing and invoicing system. What on earth did you think you needed a billing and invoicing system for subscriptions? And how did you, get this idea, bring it together into a company and make it into something big like this?
Yeah, good question. It has been a 10-year journey. I mean, what we do, most people think of us as a billing system, but we're a complete commerce and financial solution. We do pricing, quoting, billing, revenue recognition, the whole thing. But the genesis of the idea was at Salesforce. And if you simplify down, you spend 9 years at Salesforce, starting in the early days of trying to figure out how do we use this new thing called a new business model called subscriptions, a pay-as-you-go business model where we would go to companies and say, look, you don't have to pay us millions of dollars, right? And then you deal with how to make this whole thing work. Just pay us on a monthly basis. Pay us based on how many users you have. And that simple idea has exploded, and now the whole software sector is sold and purchased and consumed as a subscription. And what we thought 10 years ago, we took a step back and we said, there's nothing about what we did that's intrinsic only to software. Like it could really apply to any other industry. And we looked at early examples of Zipcar and the version of Netflix when they were still mailing out DVDs. And we said, look, there's a whole world of subscription services that can be had. And that was a really, really interesting idea for us because what you're looking for as an entrepreneur, especially a Silicon Valley venture-backed entrepreneur, is you're looking for these discontinuities in the marketplace to build a very, very big company. And so we said, look, if every company really does go in this direction, and every industry goes in this direction and becomes a subscription service, they're all going to need a whole set of systems that we had to build ourselves at Salesforce. And we never liked it, never did what we wanted. We always wanted to buy from somebody else. And so we put 1 + 1 together and said, that is a big opportunity. And that's something that it's worth sort of dedicating your lives to and trying to build a big company out of.
Great. And just real quickly, what was the state of that software when you started at Salesforce? I mean, were you doing this in spreadsheets, or what kind of software was out there for you to buy for a subscription billing and invoicing system?
Well, I mean, if you go back to the second year of Salesforce, this is going back to 2000, 2001. We looked in the marketplace to see, can we buy a commercial billing system? And there really wasn't anything. I mean, the closest thing was these billing systems they sell to telecom companies. But these things cost like $10, $20, $30 million. And we were maybe doing $1 million at the time. It just didn't make any sense. So like any other good software company said, look, we could just build this ourselves. And so we tried to do that. And over the years, we add more to it. It became this monstrosity and never did what the business wanted. And in 2007, we were facing down another multi-million-dollar expenditure to hire more people, to throw more, good money after bad on the system. And that's when the light bulb went on, right? And we had shared this experience with a couple folks from Salesforce, and one of them actually became my co-founder. And they were experiencing the same thing. So it's like if WebEx and Salesforce is experiencing the same thing, everybody needs this. But the bigger idea, again, was, well, it's not just the software sector that would be sold as a subscription, but that you and I, today, we're not buying anything anymore, right? We tend to simply pick up our phone and access a service for food, for entertainment, for transportation, for work, whatever it happens to be. And that's what we mean by this broader subscription economy.
Right. And so, Jason, you've been investing in software for more than a decade. Tell us a little bit more about your background in that, and what got you interested in Zuora when you saw this and heard this idea and thought, I need to have a position in this and come along for the ride, given that you're now on the board and remain involved.
Yeah, happy to. So prior to being an investor, and I've been here at Shasta since we started the firm 14 years ago, I spent 5 years at Walmart.com, which was Walmart's e-commerce company done as a separate entity here in Silicon Valley with venture backing. And we grew that business from the ground up, from zero to a very large company. And then we actually sold that back to Walmart and they integrated it in. But as part of that experience, I was very involved in our back end of our business, in finance, payment processing, logistics, customer service. And as part of that role, basically being in charge of operations, I consumed tons of software. We wrote a lot of that software internally. We bought a lot of software. We integrated with legacy systems that Walmart corporate had. And I knew from that personal pain of having finance operations report to me how difficult it is to have payments and finance as a system. It is mission critical. It has to get done. It's got to be bulletproof. It can't be wrong. And it's prone to fraud because everyone's trying to get at your money. So I had that context. And when I left Walmart.com and joined Shasta when we came together and started investing, I do a mix of consumer and enterprise investing. Over the first few years of investing, my partner Ravi and I, who at the time did all of our software investing, saw over and over again the same complexities that Tien's talking about at Salesforce. We'd be sitting in a boardroom and you'd hear the story of the head of sales wants to discount by 10% in the middle of the month, or some customer wants to add 20 seats to an account in the middle of the month. And you'd always see the VP of engineering in the corner like cringing, like curling away, and you'd go, what's going on? And they'd say, well, two guys kludged that system together a few years ago, and it's written in something we're not really quite sure, and every time we touch it, everything breaks. And so you saw over and over again that there was this complexity associated with billing for subscriptions that people dramatically underestimated. And I saw that firsthand. Ravi and I saw that from our board experience with other subscription companies, and I also knew it from living it personally. So when I heard about the company and first met Tien, we'll talk about our first meeting separately because that was a whole different thing. Tien's a force of nature, and I'm thrilled to have had the opportunity to support him for years and to continue to today. But I knew the complexity that was there, and when he described the vision for me, I really understood it and just knew I had to be a part of it and ride this huge wave.
Fantastic. So that actually brings up something really interesting that I wanted to kick off the discussion, Tien, about how you built this company up and went to market with it. One of the unique things about Zuora is you got to think about where does this plug into the target customer. And it essentially plugs into the ERP and financial stack, which when you look at kind of the core systems of record in most companies, you've got sales and marketing systems, you've got human resources systems, and you've got this one, and it's really a pillar of a company. Sales and marketing, if you're going to market with something in that space, you can often convince a company, maybe they've got a new product group or something like that, and you can convince them to try out something new and different. HR is a little tougher, but then finance is always seen as kind of the hardcore because, as Jason was saying, it's really important because everybody's trying to get at your money and everybody wants to get paid. And if it screws up, somebody is going to get in big, big trouble. So how did you start as a small company going out to customers and say, hey, I've got this thing. It's really going to solve a problem for you, but you have to plug it into the heart and lungs of your business. And trust me to do that. Yeah.
Well, in hindsight, we did pick off a big challenge. This is a very complicated product to build compared to the previous experience of building a CRM application. There was a lot of complexities back then because The whole concept of SaaS was new, and there was no open source tools to actually figure out how to build scalable systems. But the product itself was much simpler compared to what we did. And you're absolutely right. When we go in, it's got to integrate in an environment. And there's something to be said for the naiveness and optimism of entrepreneurs, right? If they had known how hard it was, who knows if we would have done it or not. But once you're in there, you got to make it work. And I would say the lesson for me in that dimension was probably a little different. It was having seen the success of Salesforce. I think there was a naive assumption in the early days that we would just take what we did at Salesforce and just do the same thing. It's another category, but just do the same thing, and it's all going to work out well. And what we realized was early on that we had a very different business model, right? At Salesforce, a salesperson can actually close 4 deals in a month. We're lucky if our sales reps close 1 or 2 deals a quarter, right? Luckily, though, our space and what we were tackling is there's an alignment between the complexities of what we do and how important it is. Right, and that dimension has to work, and so it was something that the alternative for companies wasn't great, right? It's not like they can throw bodies at the problem and solve this problem on a long-term basis, and so they needed something, and it also was a big driver of their ability to grow, and so what that translates to is, well, they're willing to pay more for it, right? Than say, our first few deals at Salesforce. And so the combination of saying it's mission critical, but there's enough money into it, that's really what allowed us to have enough runway to build the right product and then build the right supporting infrastructure, how to make that product successful with our customers.
Right. So you've got this off the ground. You're starting to get this first sales in. At some point, you and Jason meet. So I would like, since Jason brought it up, to hear just a little bit about that first meeting. And Tien, your background is in sales, I understand, before you started this. So tell me about, the pitch and the reception and how that first meeting went.
Well, most entrepreneurs pitch VCs. I think Tien's background was in interrogation. I met him. The company was at the time located in Redwood Shores, and I met him at a hotel, and we went in and sat down. And I mean, before I could even get the words out of my mouth of, I'm Jason, he said, so why should I work with you? And it proceeded to get a lot more aggressive from there. But it was actually really remarkable. And it actually, I think, is a strength of yours about how you like to, in terms of thinking about marketing, turn things around. And it kind of put me on my heels, but I came out of it feeling, wow, this guy really is driven. He is a force of nature. And he asked really thoughtful questions, and I guess I did okay because he at least continued talking to me because he had a lot of choices in that financing and fortunately chose me. But what I saw in Tien was a really strong, brilliant entrepreneur, driven, passionate, and for the most part understood what he was tackling. I will say that one of the things that at the time we identified as a big risk was I did think you were underestimating the complexity of the problem. And I think that part of the DNA of Salesforce and WebEx and the co-founders of having had a more simple product in the previous generation was one of the things that was going to be something we had to overcome. But quick learners learn quickly and adjusted, as Tien just talked about.
So Tien, yeah, this brings us to a great question about scaling a company. As you scale a company, you're going to be potentially bringing in different investors at different points in its life. You got a really diverse set of investors over the course of the slightly more than 10 years between starting this thing and taking it public last year. What advice do you have for picking those investors, and how do you do this interrogation to decide who's coming along for the ride, especially knowing that they're going to be a part of your life and potentially kind of your boss for the better part of a decade?
Yeah. So I didn't realize it was an interrogation, but but in many ways, I do get asked a lot about from other entrepreneurs. How do you think about picking investors, picking the board? Let me sort of give you the naive view that I had, actually, and luckily overcame. I think a lot of entrepreneurs get sort of caught up in percent of the company, voting power, and stuff like that, right? And they said, look, I'm going to pick a few investors, but I want more voting power, or I want my 2 investing board members, I want to pit them against each other, right? You know what I mean? And that's just insanity, right? Because what you're really doing is you're really tackling something that's really, really hard and has never been done before, which by definition means you're going to go through a whole bunch of challenges, right? And I don't know what the right metaphor is, right? Maybe Lord of the Rings, right? But you have a group of people that are trying to tackle a big challenge. There has to be a camaraderie, there has to be a trust, and there has to be a working, a relationship that allows you to overcome that. And so you got to pick the people that are going to be on your team very, very carefully. And then you also got to make sure that the team members individually are going to work well together, right? Which is a combination of culture fit, it's a combination of diversity, right, in thought and complementary skills. And so one of the things that we really liked about Jason was his operational background, right? And so if you look at the 4 core VC members in my first 4 rounds, we have a good mix of folks that bring a people skill set to the table, operations skill set, strategy skill set, and fundraising skill set. And so we can tap into these things at the appropriate time. But also we create an environment where there can be a lot of just free-form discussion and honesty about what the challenges are, right? And a lot of great brainstorming and thinking. And I think looking back, if we didn't have the right set of people around the table and a set of working relationships and discussions around the board, it would have been harder, much harder for us to work through, and it's not clear that we would have been able to work through the challenges that we did.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of challenges, the nice part of the interview is over. Now we're going to start with the interrogation. Where we get into the nitty gritty. So what's going to happen here is I'm going to do kind of a more detailed question here about the SaaS business, and we're also going to be taking some questions. So I'd like to tee up the Facebook Live audience. If you're out there, please start submitting some questions now. And after we do this one here, we'll get one to these two guys, and then we'll also get some audience questions in. But to get into the nitty gritty here, one thing I'm really curious about is, integration and customer success. So this is the process of getting your product into the customer, and then once they're up and rolling, making sure they're doing well with it, so that you can, ideally have a positive net dollar retention. So tell me about how you tackled those things. And I think the real question is kind of in the middle part of the business, when you're starting to get when you get that first really gnarly customer that's like, okay, let's do this deal, and then they've got their list of integration requirements and it's a mile long, and you're wondering how you're going to do it, but then that's like probably your biggest ACV, annual contract value, for those folks out there at home, and you really got to keep that in the fold with your customer success team. So how did you attack those two things? Let's start with integration, and then kind of follow a customer as they go through getting them on board, and then making sure that after that first year or whatever the term is, that they're coming back and even asking for more.
Yeah. Well, just a big assumption that you have in the way you phrase the question, which is really important, especially for us, is there is something about the subscription model, and now that most of software, especially the startups, are like this, where you are forced to focus on your customer, and you're focused on the customer is not going to renew on an ongoing basis unless they're successful, right? And there's probably every SaaS company that has faced down a customer success, an adoption, a renewal challenge, right? It's just sort of a rite of passage, if you will, which is why we believe the subscription business model is going to take hold, because once you go through that, it does make you a much stronger company. It makes that relationship stronger. But you're absolutely right. I mean, when you start, you have a rough idea of what the need is, but our knowledge was anchored on 2 companies' experiences, and we set out to say, the other thing about us is we thought the prize, as from a building a company's perspective, was to build a horizontal system that can work for any company. And what we didn't want to build a niche solution that only service SaaS companies. So, for example, 50% of our customers only right now are technology. It used to be 100, but now it's only 50%. So we work in a lot of other industries, media, manufacturing, car companies, and so on and so forth. And so you don't necessarily know. And so you've got to rapidly learn from your initial customers. And so you have to be able to have a point of view, but then change that point of view really, really quickly. So one of the things we discovered is we had a point of view, again, early on, that says, well, software as a service companies really shouldn't have a lot of professional services revenue. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to deploy. Which is kind
of inherited from Salesforce.
It's inherited from Salesforce.
They run it at
not a big part. Yeah. And so we said, well, let's just push all this stuff to partners. But then we've realized, again, the complexities of what we do, and some of it wasn't just technology. Some of it was helping companies think through business process, things, architecture, integration, and we really needed to help our customers. And so one of the big things that, in hindsight, that we had to face down was how do we build a professional services team that can actually take our technology and make it successful with customers. But then we also wanted to build a bidirectional bridge, right? So they had to be able to learn from the initial set of customers and funnel that learning all the way back into engineering in a very, very tight cycle. We weren't in an environment where we could say, look, we know how to build a perfect product, launch it out there, and everything's going to work fine, right? We had to build a system that allowed us to learn while we went along. But you have to balance that because you can't overpromise the customer and then find out that, well, look, our product actually doesn't meet your use cases either, right? And then that's not going to create customer success. So learning how to build the company block by block, and that's why I say it's not just about technology, but it's about the whole thing that you have to wrap around your product to make it successful.
And just as a quick follow-up to that, as we get things teed up to do questions here, one thing that's interesting about where you are now is you've got that other half of the business that's not software companies and technology companies has very much, you've had some big verticals emerge. The news business is one. Subscriptions have become very important there. You've got automotive has become a big one. I think at the last earnings, you said you have 6 out of the big 10. So where in the process, how do you know when you're growing, when something is emerging as a vertical, and to say, hey, I should build a specialty around this. I should pull together a team that when we're pursuing a deal is, this is the automotive team, both in the sales sense and in the integration and customer success sense. How do you see those things in real time as they start to emerge, kind of once you've got the fires of being a very young company out and things are up and rolling and you're looking at where to go next, how can you, do you just sense it like Yoda-like in the data, or do you try to land an anchor customer, or what's the method?
Well, I'll frame it a little differently, right? I think what you try to find as you build these startups is what is the learning that's different than conventionally what people teach you in business school and in other companies, right? The way a big company makes a decision is going to be, look, do we make this better or not? Someone's got to go do the analysis and put together a proposal. And it's still a gamble at that point, but you're taking the best guess that you can, right? But you're going to deploy infrastructure, you're going to deploy people, and you want a structured way of thinking about things. And if it fails, it fails, right? And because it's a portfolio game at that size anyway. As a startup, you don't really have that luxury, right? If you say, look, I think auto's going to work, or newspapers is probably a better example because we saw it early in 2011.
Right, you went there before it was really clear.
Yeah.
Now, I think a lot of people have the sense, most serious newspapers now are trying to either do full subscription or a mix of ads and subscriptions. But when you started landing your first newspaper clients, that was far from obvious.
Well, we were in board meetings and talking about, I think there's something going on in newspapers, and our board was like, are you kidding? The newspaper industry is going to die. Why are you chasing that vertical? And then in the whole media sector, I think we announced in the earnings call is about 13% of our revenues now, right? So it's not insignificant.
I recall a healthy board discussion.
And so how do you bootstrap these decisions? How do you put feelers in? And so in this specific example, we're probably too big to be doing stuff like this anymore. We actually launched a product called Zuora for media before we actually had a product. And we showed a demonstration of how this can work, and then we put a storyline around it of how we were going to save journalism, which is a little bombastic, but it gets the message across. And then we tested it, and then we got a bunch of inbound bites to tell us that this is going to be real. The other thing we said is, well, we don't want to build a vertical specific product. So how do we be really smart about taking the requirements from these things and then navigating what of it is generic that any company can use, and what of it is really specific to that company or even that industry. And for the things that are specific to the company industry, especially for a young company, right? Because you're looking for leverage at that point, and so you don't want to go too far vertical or at all in your engineering. How do we let those type of things be customizations, not that our engineers are doing, but that our professional services team, again, this is the benefit of having that, or the customers can do, or a third party can do, right? And so you structure in such a way that allows you to put feelers in the marketplace and then learn and iterate really, really quickly.
Right. So I guess the follow-up to the follow-up, and then I'd like to take an audience question here, so please gather your thoughts here. The follow-up to the follow-up on that is, do you think that approach would work for companies that don't have an extremely strong marketer in the key position? I don't know if folks know, but you were the original CMO for Salesforce, a company known to not be a slouch in its marketing. Do you think that approach can work even if you don't have the same kind of marketing genius that Tien brings to the table?
Well, I mean, I get labeled this sometimes, but I like to tell people I don't know anything about marketing, right? I was like, well, how did you become CMO? I mean, literally, Mark Benioff just called me in his office one day, and he's like, hey, what's up, Mark? He was like, yeah, I think I want you to be our first CMO. And I was like, well, why would you want to? I'm a product guy, right? I've done a little bit of sales. I don't know anything about marketing. In classic Mark, he's like, oh, don't worry about it. You're going to do great. And so I had a chance to work with him and watch him.
Before like Coursera even, right? So you can be like, oh, crap, I got to take a marketing course.
There was no books. And plus Mark didn't rejected all the books. And so, but, so I did get a chance to learn the craft. Obviously we're working with Mark and I have a language and thinking around that. But I think marketing can be broken down and learned. And for this specific example, this is years ago, but I was talking to somebody who wanted to build, I think, a software as a service product for field service. And after talking with me, he's like, that's a good idea. He went and built a website, took out a bunch of Google AdWords on words like field service, see how many people went to the website, right? Put the pricing in the pitch and said, buy or talk to sales. And just measured how many clicks that he actually got to get a sense of whether there's a marketplace or not, right? So there are always things, especially today's world, that you can do to test ideas out. Great.
Well, I'd like to do an audience question now, and then for the Facebook Live folks, we're also going to be coming to you in just a second. I'll have this iPad that is going to show me questions from you. They're not quite shown up there yet, but we'll get that worked out. In the meantime, let us start over. We'll start over here. How about in the first row here, and just make sure we speak into the mic so that the folks on the live broadcast can also hear us.
Perfect, thank you. So I actually read your book, Subscribed, over the holidays, which I loved. And my favorite chapter was around the industrial manufacturing, which I thought was super interesting and an area you wouldn't think would be early adopters of subscription. So you have a unique lens into what verticals are capitulating and going into subscription. So question for you is, in 2019, what are you seeing as the number one vertical that is starting to get into subscription? And what do you think is the next one after that?
These things are multi-year transformations, right? And so Salesforce was founded in 1999. When we started this company in late 2007, we were convinced, coming from Salesforce and WebEx, that the world was going to go this way. But in 2008, honestly, big companies had not yet embraced software as a service. It took the whole recession and downturn to really push the big companies to a cloud-first strategy versus a cloud if you have to strategy, right? And so these things take a long time. And so the manufacturing sector we're really excited about. What we see is the industries that tend to move faster, there's something going on in that industry which is a disruptive force. Right? And so you saw that for software. For media, it was Google sucking up all the advertising dollars. For cars, it's obviously ride sharing, right, with a looming threat of self-driving cars, right, some point in the future. For manufacturing companies, we were surprised when we first saw it. We were like, I don't know that we knew like Caterpillar and these companies would be customers today. And it turned out in hindsight, it was IoT. And IoT, it turns out, was a lot more real than perhaps we even realized. In that the last 5-6 years, companies have all invested in sensors and network connectivity. So if you buy a washing machine today, chances are it's a smart washer, and chances are it's connected to the internet, right? Every car is connected to the internet. I think the next wave we're going to see, which will be really interesting, is these non-electronic devices, chairs and floors. There will be a thin layer of electronics, and they're going to become smart products as well. And so that's a disruptive force that we're seeing in those industries. We're seeing early signs of probably utilities, financial services, but I don't see yet, right? Maybe Robinhood and things like that will grow, and I know that brokers like Fidelity are thinking about this, but I think it's going to come. And so financial services is something we're looking at. The one that's obviously as a disruptive force is probably retail. But for some reason, the retailers can't get out of their own way at a macro level. So innovation there is more in the startup world.
Yeah, I think just to take a stab at that, I think what we're seeing is that consumer subscription businesses are exploding in a good way, but it's not typically traditional retailers or traditional consumer packaged goods, it's startups. So we were early investors in Dollar Shave Club, which grew really rapidly. We've got an investment in a company called The Farmer's Dog that does direct-to-consumer, high-quality dog food. We've got an investment in the Pill Club, which is birth control pills delivered directly to women. We've got an investment in Imperfect Produce, which is delivering produce that's not perfect out of the supply chain. And all of those companies are startups, and there's a bunch of others that we're not involved with, that are going direct to the consumer and creating new brands. That is a really compelling way for consumers to get products. Consumers don't have the ability to subscribe to 50 things, but they probably have the ability to subscribe to 10 to 20. And those categories are growing
Probably subscribe
rapidly.
to 50 things. You just don't know it.
Check your credit card statements, Jason. All right, so I wanted to do one from the online questions here. And one that I found really interesting here is, were there any false positives as you scaled the business?
Of course.
So, yeah, so what were some of those? And you know, I think the false positive is always tough because you get really excited about it, right? Like entrepreneurs tend to get really good at dealing with failure. It's part of the game, right? But you know, the false positive is a little trickier. So any significant ones that you could talk about and kind of how you recognize them and dealt with them?
Well, you know, one early false positive is you sign up all these customers because you have a value prop that resonates, and a lot of companies come at you, right? And the next thing you know, you wake up, and whether it's 30 customers, 300 customers, 3,000 customers, you have a diverse set of customers. And at that point, you know, usually only about half those customers, or you know, maybe if you're lucky 70%, if you're unlucky 30%, are really the customers that you should have at scale, right? Because and it's hard. It's hard to wrestle with this stuff as an entrepreneur. Because like, what am I going to do? I'm going to fire my customers, right? And well, you don't really have to do that, but really understanding which of the customers that will help you build a really successful, healthy business model as you continue to spread is really, really important. And so, you know, this conversation is more about startups, building companies. You know, we have a mental model called the Climb, and there's a few other things. And it's a visualization of how to build a company to $100 million, $1 billion. And the key thing is a visualization of switchbacks. And this idea when you climb a mountain, you don't really just scale the side of the mountain, right? Unless you're these crazy free climbers, right? You know, you do switchbacks to climb the mountain. And we like the switchback metaphor because a lot of times when you're growing these companies is you go through an inflection point where the things in the past, right, aren't the things that you need to carry into the future, right? And these false positives are examples of that. And so how do you create a mental construct that forces you to say, you know what, I learned a lot from this phase. Let me take a blank sheet of paper out, right? Let me reset my goal for the next phase and then figure out which of the past things I want to do to drop away, right? Like what are my lessons that I learned that in hindsight I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do this, I should do more of this, and then carry those things with you into the future. But I guarantee you that, you know, the first, again, X customers, depending on your business model, that you close, a bunch of them you should never have closed. But you only know that through hindsight. So you have to have the courage to accept that. And it doesn't mean, again, you fire them, but stop closing those customers, right? You know, go find and close the good customers.
And how do you know, just to follow up on that switchback concept, you know, how do you know when, to use the analogy, when you're still making progress up the mountain and that the switches aren't coming too close together, so you're just kind of buzzing? And, you know, it's kind of a question of how do you know you're on the right track and in terms of having just one business or a set of discrete businesses versus just being pulled in too many directions because there are revenue opportunities. But, you know, if you do that, you're going to waste so much overhead that the margin's going to get really crappy on that if you're pulled in too many different directions. So
yeah.
How do you kind of understand when, you know, maybe businesses are branching off and you've got to go with this one, and as you said, stop closing deals on that other branch. But how do you understand when they're kind of breaking into discrete streams, and you need to take that churn up the switchback?
So this is not an exact science, but two things, right? One is structurally, how do you sort of put measurement points along the system, right? The 10x, 1 million, 10 million, 100 million, is too broad. The 2x doesn't quite feel right, so we just sort of split it. We call it the ones and threes. And so we just put milestones at 1 million, 3 million, 10 million, 30 million. And so, we're a public company now. You can look at our financials, right? 300 million is looming in front of us. And so there's going to be a conversation now.
Not a forecast for revenue for the end of the year, which they will be reporting quarterly
some point in front
soon.
of us.
Thank you very much for joining us,
Forward-looking
Mr. SEC. Actually, they're all furloughed, so what do we do?
They're not working. They're all working right now, so don't worry about it. Yeah. So we're going to be thinking about, okay, well, what are the transitions that we did? We did the same thing. We were approaching 100 million, some number of years ago. And then the second thing we did was say, okay, you get a lot of advice, right? Do you focus on the business model? Do you focus on the customer? When do you do these things? And so we just try to sequence each of these things to say, okay, look, for the first million, just focus on proving the idea. To get to 3 million, focus on proving the product, right? And a lot of this proving is you're trying to prove what you need to have proven in the next phase, right? When you get to, I think, $10 million is I can't remember what it was, right? $30 million is prove the business model. $100 million was prove the vision of the company, because if you hit $100 million, you're going to have to start talking about the broader long-term vision. And just to set milestones along each of the way for you to focus on, and then you can sort of filter these things, right? And so the business model, don't ignore the business model, but you don't have to perfect the business model when you're just trying to get to 1 million or trying to get to 3 million.
Right.
Right. But as you're getting to 10 million, now's the time to perfect the business model, and now's the time to take a hard look that says which customers are more profitable than other customers. Again, it doesn't mean you fire customers necessarily, but you need to take that knowledge and build that into how you think about building the next leg of your business.
Yeah. So actually, that brings me, I want to take another online question from the Facebook Live audience that relates to this. As you go from 10 million or 30 million to 100 million, the other thing you've really got to focus on is process and systemizing things. So one thing people are wondering here is when you scaled the business, how did you systemize the process on what you sold? And so I'll do a little interpretation there. I think that means, how do you build process and systematic selling when at that point you probably may even still know most of your salespeople by name, and many of them are. The sales folks come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. They all have different styles and techniques and things like that. But at a certain point, you're big enough that there has to be some consistency to the outside world when you come with the approach. So how did you start to put those processes in place, especially around sales and what you're going to sell and how you're going to sell it? And maybe this is a way of asking, how do you kind of crystallize a sales culture, right? When it morphs from being a gaggle of personalities and everything in a gong to more of a system.
Yeah, so by breaking the process of building the company in these phases, right, it just gives you a richer language, and to understand that each phase is different. So when I find myself talking with early stage founders, right, so below 30 million, oftentimes below $1 million, I find myself saying, and this is contrarian advice that they're getting, don't hire a salesperson, right? And because I think back on our early days of Salesforce, and I don't know whether we did this intentionally, but the first 30, 50 employees, probably 30, you're either an engineer or non-engineer. And if you're a non-engineer, guess what? You dealt with customers, right? And so all of us just dealt with customers. We talked to them. Again, none of this language existed because Salesforce invented this language, but we talked to them as SDRs, we closed them as salespeople. I deployed, some set of our first 10 customers, right? Brian, Millen, Diane, and Mark, they deployed the other ones. And, but then what happened is once we get to 30, 40 people and we start building the departments, well, what happened, right? I went and ran product management. Brian went and ran business development. Another guy went to run, training. Another person went to run support. But we had this shared understanding of how to get customers successful, and it created a glue for the company. If we had instead hired a bunch of salespeople, they would have been a filter towards us actually learning how to build this company in the early stages. So there's actually a downside to hiring salespeople too early. You rather just throw a bunch of people that are that will become the department heads when the company forms and do that learning, right? Then there's the next stage, which is, okay, you want 10 salespeople, say, all right? But you're going to be personally involved in every single deal and in some shape or fashion. And so there's more of a group learning in that environment, right? So you have to have some of these things pinned down and some repeatable success, but you can touch every deal, you can guide every rep, you can say, well, don't do this, right? Then, you're going to get an environment where, okay, you have 30 salespeople and you have managers, right? Or a management layer, right? Then you got to think a different way. And now, I don't think we actually talked about the number of salespeople we have, but imagine like a big number of salespeople, 3 layers of management worldwide. And I'll discover I drop into some country called Germany, and they're selling differently than the U.S., right? And it's like, oh, that's not good, right? And so now you've got to actually put sales enablement, sales operations, sales structure. You got to put a measurement system, and you visualize a brand new salesperson without the luxury of having you or your head of sales, on sales calls with them. How do you deliver a level of consistency with them? So it winds up just being a different scale challenge at these different phases.
This is a place where a board, investors can be really helpful to a company as they scale. Because irrespective if you have the founders and the original people selling or not up front, they should always be selling, but most companies have salespeople. What a board and what investors can help do is help a CEO see when someone's actually leveling out. And the person who may be the extraordinary person to do the first $1 million or a couple $1 million of sales probably is not the right person to take the company to 20 million, and is probably a different person than the executive who has the skills to run a company from 20 to 100 or 100 to 300, because it's just a different skill set of running hundreds of people with multi-departmental, with regions. It's just a different level of organization. And that's true in every functional area. And so I think really helping think through and bringing the pattern recognition that you have as a board member and investor of seeing that can really help CEOs see that, because a lot of times it's hard to move people out of an organization, even though they aren't necessarily right for the next level.
Yeah, and that brings me, I want to ask a question, another audience question right after this. But the one thing that I wanted to ask you, Jason, is, okay, so you put your money in, right? And then you assume some fiduciary duties. But beyond money and the formal duties, what other kind of things do you bring to the success of this investment? So that's one great thing, is an outside voice and, listen, you are the perfect person to do this from $10 to $30 million. It's probably time to bring in some other people to handle this from 3,200. What kind of things like that do you look to offer the companies that you're investing in and serving on the boards of? And, a way to phrase this is for the entrepreneurs and business folks in the audience, what should they be asking their investors to do? And, for your peers in the business, advice for them on what they can bring besides the check and the votes.
Yeah. Entrepreneurs should absolutely be asking that, and they could do it in the interrogatory fashion that Tien did it with me up front, or in kind of through heavy referencing. And I think looking at when you have an investor, you're signing up.
You had all your CEOs call me.
Well, I did. But you also can call those CEOs and talk to them and understand what that individual board member is going to bring, what that investor is going to bring. Different people bring different sets of skills to the table. Our perspective at Shasta is one. It's not the only one, but it's a very entrepreneur-friendly, entrepreneur-centric approach, which doesn't mean we won't challenge you, but it means we're not going to be jerks about it. We try very hard to be respectful. And then what are the other things we bring? We try to bring, and what I think you should look for as an early stage entrepreneur is someone who can bring strategic thought partnerships. So when you're facing really big challenges, is this person going to be able to really help me think through strategically how to face that challenge and what are the different options? There oftentimes are multiple right answers to a question, but you have to pick one and execute against it. You can't execute against you have to pick one answer. So someone who can help you think through those things, someone who can help recruit, someone who can help with financing, help make introductions and help think about the financing strategy, and someone who can help you think through scaling a company through multiple stages, particularly because when you take on a board member, you're typically taking that person on for a very long time. I've been on Tien's board for over a decade, since the company had a small handful of customers and now is approaching 300 million. No forward-looking statements. And so I think those are the types of things that you should look for. And Tien probably should answer that question too, because he's picked a lot of board members.
Well, I do tell people, and it's true, it's sincere, I've been really lucky to be able to pick board members and have a really good board and a working relationship. But I'll give you a contrasting example. I had an entrepreneur earlier stage reach out, and struggling with something. It's like, okay, let's grab coffee. And he's spent 15 minutes griping about his board member. And I'm listening, and, the board member doesn't really understand. He's making all these, like recommendations without really the nuances of what we do and so on and so forth. And I was like, okay, you got to take a different direction, right? Your board member is in the foxhole, right, to use that old analogy, with you. And you got to stop judging or looking down on this person. I want you to go have dinner with the board member and just like hear out his frustrations with you and air out your frustrations with them. Because I'm sure he's got a whole similar talk track about his frustrations with you going on right now, right? And he did that, and now they're in a really good place. But it was trending in the wrong direction, and I see that, right? Every board member, hopefully you did a good job, but once the board member is in, they're in, and they want this thing to be a success as well. Right? So you have a common goal, which is to make this thing a success. How do you remain aligned in that common goal? It doesn't mean you agree with everything, but how do you remain aligned in terms of, okay, here's, I think, what the issues are, right? Here's what we want to get to as the next goal. And then the arguments or the discussions could be more around techniques, right? Or, and usually it's bringing in diverse ideas that get you at the best idea. But that alignment at a high level is really, really, really important.
Right. All right, I'd like to do some audience questions here. Do we have anything from this side? I don't want you guys to feel neglected because you're over there and I can see the hands over here, but we've got hands over here.
They made us sit like this. So
yeah,
our
it's
backs
not,
are to you.
it's not, I realize.
Blame the TV people.
Let's do, so I want to get to the back of the room real quick. So let's go right back here to the gentleman in the jacket, and just hold on just a moment with the microphone. He's right back here, so that we can make sure that everybody can hear who's following along on Facebook Live and is captured for posterity.
So one of the things I've always admired about you is your ability to tell a story. And
well, thank you. Oh, I mean, you mean these guys.
You do. Can you tell us a little bit about the art of telling a great story?
I remember a moment in, like, I was 8 years old, Cub Scouts, and camping, and people are sitting around the campfire, and they're telling ghost stories, and I couldn't come up with a story. And so I don't think I was born as a storyteller. But then, my early 20s, I did do sales for a couple of years, and I found myself just presenting, like literally 2-3 times a week. And so it's just through practice. And I will put a plug. I mean, I sometimes think, if you could go back in time and live another life, what kind of degree would you do? And I don't know if I actually would do it, honestly, but I have a fantasy that I would be a reporter, right? Because there is something about that. And I'll tell you that people say the subscription economy. Where did we come up with that? And it was like month 3 in the company. This is actually before we got Jason involved. I just found a reporter friend that I just became friends with when I was Salesforce, this guy, Tom Tolley. And I said, look, what are you trying to do? And we were still in stealth mode. And it's like, well, look, Salesforce, we kind of disrupted Siebel, and Zipcar is kind of disrupting GM, and Netflix is disrupting Blockbuster, right? Again, it's early 2008, and blah, 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 blah. I probably talked for 20 minutes, and Tom's like, okay, I got it. And then the next day he wrote this blog post, and it was headlined, Powering the Netflix Economy, right? And I was like, that is the journalistic instinct, right? To be able to delve into the story and distill it down, and bring out what exactly is going on, right? Take the complexity and it turns into something that we can all read and understand in a rapid amount of time. And we looked at the Netflix economy. It was like, we love that tagline, but we can't call it a Netflix economy. We're going to get sued, right? And so we came up with a subscription economy eventually, and ran with it. But you gotta practice. You gotta practice, and then when you read, you just gotta break down. So we have this weird thing, like in our marketing team, our storytelling team, where we love to break down movies and extract like the storylines. Like, are we trying to tell the Avengers story? Mm-hmm. Are we trying to tell, right, the I Am Legend story, right? Are we trying to tell the Social Network story? Because we're trying to break down common storylines that we all see.
Having watched it for years, I'd say there's one other really important component, which is being highly iterative.
That's right.
It's not just that, hey, a bunch of people sit in a room and figure it out, and then it's all done. It's that you write something, you play with it, you try it, try it again, you modify, and then you see how people react. And so I think a big component is the iterative nature of it.
Yeah. All right, let's get back over to this side. Let's go right here in the second row here. And if we could just wait till we get the microphone there so that we'll capture everything.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm Alexi Veneri, also a fellow marketer and a client for 7 years with a company called Digital Airstrike.
Yeah, of course.
I love that you were talking earlier about professional services, because looking at Jason a little bit, we have a common investor. We did that early on because I also came from a subscription business that was successful when I was a marketer, when IPO. And we definitely saw that by having that kind of managed services piece, that whole customer support, massive group of people, and all that churn, I mean, you have to take care of your clients. But we found kind of early on that having professional services was just a better way to do it, and you could monetize it because you're not charging for those inbound support calls, right? Have you, two-part question, found that you've been able to reduce that larger, let's say, do-it-yourself, but call into the customer support line, cost of business? And two, can you help us with kind of the investment community seeing that having that professional services piece that's not necessarily subscription, because they come in and out when they need those consulting projects, actually isn't a downside? When they see that body count on your financials, that actually helps with retention. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah. So it's a phases company. In the early phase, it's all kind of fuzzy because you're trying to get the customer successful. A couple of mistakes that we see, and usually it gets exposed in the $30 to $100 million run, is you really have to get crystal clear on your income statement, right? And so separating out support, customer success, professional services, and being clear about those things, and not letting it all get fuzzy. And oftentimes, what happens is you have a reporting to the same person, which creates fuzziness, right? Because as a manager, it's like, well, they're just all resources. But when it translates to an income statement, it's actually really, really important because these are the underlying math that drive your business. And then understanding, right, that at that point you can benchmark, right? So support people are under COGS, and there is something to be said for a high gross margin, right? And so how do you structure, honestly, what really is customer support that should be in COGS? What really is professional services that you charge for, right? And customer success, if you're going to put it in sales and marketing, then it really needs to be tied to growth, right? It needs to be tied to revenue in some shape or fashion, right? Because it's a cost of sale. And being really clear about those things. Again, you can be fuzzy below 30 million, but so one of the things that we did was we decided professional services has to be a break-even business. And that was a difficult decision, right? But we said, look, if it's only losing whatever it was, $1 million. But you extrapolate $100 million, and it's going to be a big loss. At that point, it's going to be too tough to move because it's ingrained in our thinking. I would say that public investors. There are lots of other companies. Workday is another one that does have more of a professional services line, and they understand it. And the type of questions they ask, and again, you don't have to worry about this in the $30 to $100 million run, is what is the long-term revenue mix, right? And I would say that our message is we need professional services to get our customers live, right? But we're not deploying professional services to keep the customer at any scale, and helping them understand that. Then they could project out, okay, look, when you're $1 billion and 80% of your revenue is coming from customer renewals, right? This is what the mix looks like.
Great. I think we had here's one in the back row right here.
Hi. I also read the book about 4 months ago. I loved it.
Thanks.
And I'm a fellow GSPer and a former e-commerce entrepreneur.
Great.
So I'd love to hear your thoughts about, there's still a lot of friction on subscribing in retail, and would love to hear your thoughts about how that's going to get disrupted and how the subscription economy is going to grow, the pie is going to grow.
The simple answer that we see is the mistake that people go down, to simplify down, is they don't change the product, and they just think it's a business model change, right? So I'll send you a box of stuff every month, right? And that's incrementally, it can be incrementally better. It really depends. But eventually they'll just churn, and it's a convenience thing. And why don't I just buy when I need, because Amazon ships it to me anyway, so what the heck, right? So the true breakthrough ones are companies that transcend the product and try to figure out the area. So example, I like what Rent to the Runway is doing now in terms of a monthly subscription, because they're thinking, okay, look, it used to just be, it's too expensive to buy this dress, so just rent it, right? And now they move to a place where, look, we're going to try to figure out your work wardrobe, and we're going to give you like 5 things a week or whatever it happens to be, right? And so now it's more built into something that I need on an ongoing basis, right? I have to think about, the clothes I wear at work every single day. Right? Stitch Fix is more like that. You've got a relationship with a stylist that understands what you need, right? And is delivering something that goes deeper than, you buying the product, right? There's something that transcends it. Right? Uber is not about the car. It's about, okay, fundamentally, why do I have a car? I'm just trying to get from point A to point B. I'm just trying to look good, And that's why, to me, Blue Apron, right, wasn't a recurring thing, because it's not something that people use on an ongoing basis. Whereas, Munchery, I see a lot of people just saying, okay, I'll pay the $8 to Munchery because I'm using this like 3, 6, 10 times, right? There's a whole bunch of time during the month where it's just easier for me to pull out my phone and pick a food, and it's at home when I get there, right? Versus having to think about anything else. So there's something that you have to do that goes beyond just the product into the actual need that the person has.
Other questions from the audience? Looks like we have one right here.
Hi, Kevin Surace. You really sell B2B regardless of the end-to-end customer that might be consumer or whatever. And there was this big move in the history of your company, sort of in the B2B space, to begin to offer freemium opportunities for anyone to try your quote-unquote B2B software, whatever that is. That turned out well for a few vendors in the APM space, not really well for others. So I'm curious about your thought of that model of, here's something, it's supposed to be really complicated, there's no pro services, download it, try it for free, hope you can use it. We haven't found that was successful for us, but I'm curious what your thinking is of that model.
I think there's 2 big factors in software that you got to consider, right? Whether freemium makes sense or not. One is you got to understand you got to understand that the buying behavior, right? And if the buying behavior is an individual that can try things, and then you just want to use it as a lead gen. I mean, open source is great to get developers, right? As an example, Salesforce, it's still a more complicated departmental sale. But it is a departmental sale, so the free trial model made a lot more sense for us. For us, we're a multi-department decision, right? There's no department that can sneak in a billing system, and we didn't realize that, it's obvious now, right? But when you say it, so it's not like one department can do a free trial, you close it, right? So we have to go in and help the company navigate this decision, because they're not going to do it themselves, right? It's strange to say that, but it's true, right? We're a force to help companies come together in a cross-functional way and make a decision. We're oftentimes the first time that multiple departments actually talk about some of the issues, common issues that they have, and so you have to build your go-to-market aligned to how the buying behavior is, and then the second is you have to understand your market. Right, and so one of the things I often ask entrepreneurs is, okay, look, pretend you're $100 million. How many customers do you have? Right? Do you have, one customer giving you 100 million, 10 customers giving you 1 million, 100 customers giving you 100,000? Right? I think I just screwed up the math there already, but right? And visualize that, right? Because the freemium model means that. You got a big long tail, and you're going to have hundreds of thousands, right? So this business model can work for Dropbox, it can work for Slack, right? But if $100 million, like we have in the tens, we're closest to 1,000 companies giving us $100,000 each, right? And so, well, what's the point of the freemium model there, right? And so you got to understand where you sit in the spectrum in order to to know whether the freemium is right for you, right? That's why these things aren't one-size-fits-all strategies.
I think the Valley is particularly enamored with freemium, free trial, low friction model. And there was a healthy board debate, you may recall, about is there some easy button or quicker insertion point for billing many years ago. And I think ultimately it certainly relates to departmental buying, and if it's multi-departmental, I think you have to look at the product characteristics. If you have a product that can be used either historically by an individual user like a sales rep at Salesforce, or because it's a disruptive model, like New Relic did, you mentioned APM, where they went to an individual developer that could deploy APM instead of selling it to IT. If you have that characteristic where the end user can adopt something, that really is a place where it's potentially valuable. But I think that a lot of people get this wrong today, where they're trying to apply a freemium free trial model to something that has deep workflow that's embedded across departments or has multi-departmental buying. And there are lots of great companies like Zuora, like Anaplan, like Apptio, all in our portfolio that have built companies selling enterprise software. There's still a lot of great companies doing that. So don't go freemium free trial if it's not right for your business.
Great. I'd like to do one more question right here. He's been very patient. And then we will close out for the evening and let everybody make their way home through the San Francisco rain this evening.
Great comments. Is this on? Yeah. Can you describe one point, which was the inflection, where you said, if we do this, then we'll be successful, and if we don't do this, we likely will be a typical Silicon Valley company? And it'd be interesting to see if you two have different comments about this.
I know my
Cover
answer,
your
so
ears, Jason, and he'll go first, and then.
You know, so we have a board member, Peter Fenton. He calls, he loves this phrase, the violence of a startup, and it evokes like these waves crashing against, the shore. There is no magic inflection points. I mean, this is, the startup is lurching from crisis to crisis to crisis, and there's multiple inflection points. And if you go through a year without an inflection point, it probably means that, you're a slow growth company all of a sudden, right? And so that's the nature of the beast. It's survival. Now you need a big runway, and so having a sense of how big your market really is and the type of runway that you need, these things just have to match. So if you're going to do something complex, you have to have a big runway. Otherwise, it's just not going to work, right? So like companies that say, we're going to be a platform for this day one, you're never going to get the runway to do that level of complexity. And so just matching these things, right? Matching the business model with how the customer buys, matching the dollar amount with the cost of sale that you need, right? Matching the runway with the complexity of just time. You need your engineers to go through the learning curve and build a thing. These are ultimately the things that buy you time, all right? And then the rest of it is just lurching from crisis to crisis, not falling off the surfboard.
So speaking as the person whose money was, or your limited partners, money was on the line there as they lurched. What's your thought on that, Jason?
I certainly agree that with that most startups do feel like you're lurching from crisis to crisis.
What was our magic inflection point?
But I wouldn't say it was a magic inflection point, but it was the point at which I was most worried about the company, and you referenced it earlier. It was the only time.
News for me, so I'm interested.
It's the only time I never doubted that we'd be an entity that would be a good business, that would have some sort of an exit, except for in this 1 year, and I don't remember exactly what year it was, but it was when we were about 20 million of recurring revenue, and it was when you referenced before, when we had a few hundred customers, and we had sold some that maybe weren't ideal for our customer profile, and we had a much broader product footprint to build than we'd realized. We didn't realize that there weren't 5 payment gateways we had to integrate with. There were 30 that mattered and another 50 beyond that on the list. We didn't realize that this customer would have this different workflow around their billing, and we need to modify the software. So what that led to was real professional services sprawl, where our integrations were not going great, and our customer success, we had a lot of challenges in getting customers up and live. But more importantly than that, it wasn't just that we were losing money against that, and we knew we were losing money against it. We didn't really know exactly how much we were losing because we weren't. It's you laugh, but like in startups, a lot of times you're not instrumented that well because you don't spend the time to put a billing system in. Funny enough, to put a time. it wasn't really a billing system, but a time and material system to track exactly where each person's hours were going. So we didn't know which clients were costing more. And I was quite concerned at that point that if we didn't get our hands around that it actually would, I didn't know that I thought we were going to go out of business, but I thought that we might not be a great company. And I'm pretty sure you know that in hindsight. I was close to standing on the table in a board meeting, jumping up and down about it.
Yeah. No, on a numbers basis, there was one year where we probably lost 50 cents on every dollar we closed, right, of recurring revenue. And they didn't go live, right? If they didn't go live, they're not going to renew. Maybe we get 2 years out instead of 1, but it was meaningless, right? And that was really telling. But I remember that moment in time. I'll play it through a different lens. I would say that it was an important issue, but the reason the issue was flaring up was the company got into a certain size, right? So at 20 million, we're probably about 150 to 200 people, and my anchor is on the people, and at that size, the way the organization worked at 200 people had to be very different than 50 people, and this is where entrepreneurs, founders, right? You have to face something down, and what I see now is some people willing to do something. I had to face down it was me. I had to face down it was the way I was leading the company, which made sense at 50 people, but was no longer making sense at 200 people. And I had to go on a journey of basically saying, okay, what do I do about that, right? And how do I change? And how do I have a mental picture of what I need to evolve to, what match to what the company needs? And if I hadn't done those things, then the people inside the company wouldn't have been able to solve this issue. And that's why at that moment in time, Jason was probably frustrated because we weren't solving those issues as an organization, right? Versus at 50 people, if we had to hit the same exact issue, which might not technically make sense, but we would have just worked through it, right? But at 200 people, the number of people that are involved in that have to be transformed, have to be aligned, was just very, very different. Right, and this is where I came up with is, okay, like we go through these inflection points, right? Because at the time, the language that the company was feeding back to me was, we got a bad culture, we don't know what our values are, the leadership doesn't know what's going on, the left-handed and right-handed don't know, and you try to solve those things specifically, and then you realize, no, it's actually, those things are all symptoms. The organization is at a size now where the way the organization works together has to change. And if I don't lead in a different way, they couldn't evolve to, the company couldn't evolve to a different place. So
fantastic. Well, that is extremely interesting advice on how dynamic these things can be and how you have to change over the course, including yourself, which I think is probably one of the toughest things to do, whether you're growing a company or even just navigating your way through a career or any other kind of challenge. So. And on that note, I think that's a great way to end and give something for everybody to think about how you might need to change. So I want to thank everybody here in the audience tonight for joining us here at Shasta Ventures in San Francisco. Tien, thank you very much for starting Zuora and giving us cool stuff to write about. Jason, thank you for giving this guy some money to go do this crazy thing he's done. And everybody following along on Facebook Live, thank you for tuning in and joining us. If you came in partway through and you want to see the rest of this, go back and revisit it. It will be at facebook.com/Shasta Ventures. Facebook.com/Shasta Ventures. The video will be up after we're done here, and you can go back and watch it again if you'd like. So one more time, thank you all very much for coming, and have a wonderful, safe evening.
Before you say goodbye, I just want to thank Tien.
Of course.
Yes,
I want to thank Tien not only for being here, but thank you for taking me on this wild journey over the last decade. I appreciate it, and congrats on all the success. And I'm thrilled to have been able to be a service provider to you, and hope to continue to do so.
It's a great partnership. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone.